This is a group exhibition which is looking at the theme of adornment in contemporary practice. And it's looking at it might be artists that use materials and lots of decoration or detail in their work, or it might be looking at what adornment means in different cultures. It might be looking at adornment and what it means in terms of status, like if somebody is wearing a lot of things, what does that mean, how are they different? So the other reason for looking at it as a theme, looking at adornment and decoration, is the space that the show is in. The Mackintosh Museum space is a really detailed and ornate space. It's not your usual kind of white cube contemporary space. So it got me thinking about how do contemporary artists use detail and decoration and adornment in their work. So we've got 9 artists in A Conspiracy of Detail exhibition. The first artist is Hugh Locke. Hugh Locke was born in Edinburgh but lived in Guyana for his formative years, and he's now based in London. But his work is really about adornment, and his materials are amazing. He takes very cheap things like trinkets and toys, plastic things, and then he makes these most amazing sculptures out of it. So we have one of his big sculptures in the show, which is called Demeter, and it's you can kind of see that it's a queen's head, but when you go up close, it's made out of very cheap things like plastic beads. There's some skeletons dangling in there. There's like the heads of dolls, heads of lizards. It's quite an amazing thing it really draws you in to look closer at it, and it's very brightly coloured. The other 2 works we've got in the show are 2 huge photograph works that are called Restoration. When we think about public sculpture, it's mostly always men, and mostly it's because they've been very important at a time of their history. And so Hugh has done a series where he takes a photo of the statue, and then once the photograph's printed up, he literally drills trinkets, very gold things usually, into them to kind of clothe them and adorn them in almost like a costume from another culture. We've also got a new piece of work by Jim Lambie. Jim Lambie is an artist based in Glasgow and also a former Turner Prize nominee. The piece of work we have is called The Belt. In the past, he's often been drawn to very everyday things that he makes his work out of or refers to. And we've got this really beautiful, large gold belt, which is in the museum. And I think it kind of looks at ideas of adornment, and often wealthy people obviously wanting to show their wealth through kind of buying very expensive things. So this sculpture in particular looks like it's made out of very expensive materials. Next to Jim Lambie, we've got actually probably some work that is made out of the cheapest materials that you could find, which is plastic bags, shopping bags that you get at supermarkets. And Josh Blackwell is an artist in New York, and he's very interested in recycling and our culture that throws away these cheap everyday things. So he's been doing this series that he calls plastic baskets, and it's basically shopping bags, sort of plastic bags that he then embroiders into, and he kind of transforms them into another object through his embroidery. Alex Pollard is a tutor here at the art school and an artist, and we invited him to make a new work for the show. He's been doing a series of works that are mats, like doormats, which have a caricature of him on them. When he's invited to exhibit by an institution, he asks the person who perhaps has power or next step up or whatever on the hierarchy to do a caricature of him. Then he chooses one of the drawings, puts it on a mat, and then dirties the mat up, and then that goes back in the museum. So Alex invited me to do a caricature of him because I'm the curator for the show. And I think when we're thinking about adornment, we always kind of think of kind of quite bright things or shiny things or clean things. So it's quite interesting the way that he's adorning his work with dirt. One of the largest pieces of work we've got on the show is by an artist called Karen Rugaber, and Karen's based in London, and she's done this amazing relief which looks like kind of fragments that are made out of concrete, and they've got kind of bits of wood in them. They're very texturized, very kind of beautiful colours, and it almost looks like this fragment of this big mosaic that has been uncovered, and it's 6 metres long. So that's kind of one of the works which it really looks wonderful in the space. Another of the works which is made with quite unusual materials is this kind of head that's made by Jonathan Baldock. And the piece of work is called Tiresias, and it refers to a Greek myth where there was a blind prophet that lived 7 years. He was a man, but lived 7 years. He was transformed into a woman, and the head's actually made out of food dough. The colour on the head is food colouring, which kind of colours the details. I think that piece in particular relates to adornment. It's just a very detailed work. There's a lot of detail that's kind of in the covering of the head, and also just the use of colour on the work, and this kind of strange braid of ornamental hair that's kind of coming out of the eyes. So although we can recognise it as a head, it's just a very detailed work which kind of refers to this kind of past myth. The second piece of work we've got by Jonathan is called Sacred Letter Tools, and it's a series of 5 objects that we've got hanging on the wall, and they're made out of blue glass and synthetic hair and felt and leather. They're very stitched, and they're very strange objects. They look like they have a purpose, but they look very futuristic because they're in this kind of very bright blue colour. And it's almost like, because they're in the museum, it's almost like these are objects of the future, and we know they should have the purpose, but we've lost the knowledge of how to use them. The final work that I'll talk about is a series of works by Pio Abad, and Pio Abad is from the Philippines. When he went back in 2010 to visit his family, Pio's father had been gifted this quite incredibly kitsch ornamental clock covered in seashells by Imelda Marcos, and his dad didn't want to have it at all, so kind of threw it in the bin. And Pio took the clock out of the bin and then kind of started making this series of works that refer to the Marcoses and what impact that they had on the Philippines, and how they defined themselves through wealth. Then there's another piece which is a painting, and it's a painting of a myth that the Philippines have of this couple that kind of who bore the whole nation of the Philippines. And Ferdinand Marcos commissioned a painter to basically put himself in it as the father of the Philippines, and had these paintings kind of hanging in all the state buildings and in the palace as well. There's also an amazingly detailed plate, and it's got the story behind the plate is that Imelda Marcos thought she was a reincarnation of an ancient queen, and in the retelling of that story it became that it was Nefertiti. So you can see on this plate that Pio's made, there's a profile of Imelda Marcos and then a profile of the queen Nefertiti, and that kind of moves as a pattern around the whole plate. There's also a silk dress, which is the national dress, the women's dress of the Philippines, and you'll see on it that there's these almost like Campbell soup, Andy Warhol Campbell soup-esque. It's like a pattern of Heinz sandwich spread, and the story behind that, which inspired Pio to get it made, was that when the Marcoses were ousted from the palace, in one of the small homes that was in the palace, it was inexplicably full of these catering-sized jars of Heinz sandwich spread. So there's another bit of the story, which is that Andy Warhol wanted presidential figures to commission him to do their portraits. So he actually had this meeting with Imelda Marcos to see if she would commission him for the portrait, and it didn't work out. So that's why Pio's brought the two strands of the story together with the sandwich spread and as the pattern to reference Andy Warhol.